And I don't ever wanna feel like I did that day. Oh, if you are tuning in, hello. Nobody actually here on the live portion, but if you're seeing this later, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Just kind of warming up. And yeah, if you are tuning in, do not adjust your set. This is as pretty as I get. So yeah, this is the promised Q&A and live stream that I'm completely unprepared for. I didn't actually set notes out or come up with a specific agenda, but I did promise people that if we reach the sort of quick goal of getting to $1,000 on the Kickstarter campaign and 50 backers, then I would do a quick kind of overview and answer any questions and just talk to any of you who have something you want to know. So, oh, hello, Jen, and thank you. Yeah, for those of you who know what's going on, this is in support of the Kickstarter campaign I'm running. I wrote a adventure for 5th edition of a fantasy role-playing game that most of you know what it is. I don't mention it on the official material because it's being published under the Open Game License, and use of specific trademarks is not a part of that. So it's that fantasy RPG that was the very first one. So the history of this adventure was sort of accidental. My daughter Liz and I were at a convention in Texas. What's in the cave? Well, I'm going to get to that in just a minute, Chris. So we were at a convention in Austin, Texas called ChupacabraCon, which is one of my favorite conventions. In fact, it's actually taking place this weekend, so I think it starts tomorrow. I have a bunch of friends who are going to be down there, and I'm a little sad that I'm not among them, but at the same time, they have been super awesome and hosted me multiple times, so it's totally cool that they rotate the guests around, and I want to move some more people in, but I hope at some point they will invite me back. And this is kind of cool because this is a product that literally had its inception there at that convention. So Liz and I were sitting at our dealer table, and there were definitely kind of a lull at one point. So I just sketched out some notes. I had this idea for kind of a classic dungeon crawl, and I wanted it to be in a cave. I'd been thinking about a few different inspirations. So I wrote out literally just on 2 pieces of paper. We're talking quick little notes, just enough for me, because I'm an experienced game master, I could just glance at those notes, look at the map that I had, and I could run people through this, no problem. And then I had managed to get a few players in, Liz, my friend Roger, my friend Laura, got a few people together, and I ran them through this sort of really rough alpha version of the adventure, or at least that kind of dungeon crawl part of it. Had a good time, made some notes about what I would like to change as I wrote it, and after I got home, I was still very inspired, kind of like what I was doing, and I wrote it out really quickly. So in between ChupacabraCon, which is in May, and the Origins Game Fair in Columbus, Ohio, which is in June, I completely wrote the adventure. We had the map done, a rough design of the cover, a few pieces of interior illustration, and some other things that I just kind of grabbed from either Creative Commons public domain sources or stuff that I just bought from a clip art site, just to do what I call the early access edition. So I got that out, and I had it printed at 48 Hour Books up in Akron, Ohio. And a friend literally drove over there, grabbed them, and drove them down to me at the convention. So it was like this crazy turnaround from within a month, honestly, I think it was slightly less than a month, I went to having an actual thing. I had 100 copies for sale at Origins, and I put the map out on the table. There's a picture I've been posting that's on the Kickstarter. It's on some other places in social media. You'll see a long table with the map kind of draping over it, miniatures and dice out. And we did that. That was me, and my friend Ashley was working the table with me at Origins, and we're selling those. And then just the visual of the cave and all the stuff going on there was really cool. And it garnered more interest than I was expecting. So people grabbed it. I put it online. People started doing the early access. And I wasn't even, when I did this, it really was this almost kind of fun side project. I wrote this out. I thought maybe I'll sell this to my website. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but the response to it was really good. And there's a bunch of people coming in and out. So hello everyone, thank you for joining. So I wrote this adventure. It sold pretty well, and I had some other things to focus on, but I kind of realized just from the continued interest, I went back and printed more short runs of the early access, several times now, and then I put it up through DriveThruRPG's print-on-demand program, and have ordered in batches there, and have also and then also sold directly off of there. And once again, the response has been really good. People have told me they've run their groups through it. I was actually just up at GaryCon in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, my adopted hometown, and one of the cool things, my buddy George Fields, he actually had it, and for one of the games he ran, he adapted the adventure to the Hackmaster RPG that's from Kenzer, my friend Jolly Blackburn and that whole crew. And I was just tickled that, like, not only this thing isn't even officially out yet, it's just a handful of copies. It's already been adapted to a different game system, and apparently the group had fun. George had fun running it, so that's awesome. So I knew that coming up, I would really want to push to turn this into a real product, but still keep it what it was always intended to be, almost like a classic adventure module. So I was like, the original was, I think it was just over 20 pages for the early access edition. This is going to be 32, and the early access edition really just focused on the dungeon crawl, the thing in the cave that already does. And then I threw in some adventure hooks that if a game master wanted to flesh those out, wanted to expand that material at the beginning and set up the mystery and do some role playing, you could do that. I basically threw a couple of adventure hooks. They could either throw everybody straight into the cave, or you could work out some more role-playing focused and investigation kind of encounters at the beginning. But really, the only real meat of the early access edition is the dungeon crawl part. And I've gotten great response to that, and some people have, fleshed out or at least improvised kind of the opening act. So the idea is that in the final version that we're funding now, and yes, I'm plugging my Kickstarter campaign, it's the thing you do. So you can find it, go to delveinthecave.com, and that will forward straight to the Kickstarter campaign and give you more information about the stuff I'm talking about, including videos and some more detailed info. But I'm going to go over it a little bit here. So where was I? Oh yeah, so basically, I already had Act 3, the finale being the big chunk of it, already written, already edited by our editor, Emma Rome. But now I'm going to go back and flesh out that beginning and turn it into a real kind of 3-act stuff piece. So I've got already set up the backstory and mystery. Overriding this is there's a town called Shadowhaven, and it's under the influence of some kind of nasty curse that starts, around sunset, and is steadily getting worse. And it is, it's affecting what's going on in the town and messing with people and animals and children, and people aren't sleeping, and things are going downhill fast in this place. So in the fleshed out version, that's definitely where the adventure will begin, and it's kind of an homage to some classic adventures like The Village of Hamlet, Cult of the Reptile God, which were both for AD&D First Edition. And these will be this will be a nice location that players can explore, see what's going on, and there will be opportunities both for mystery solving and role playing, and point them in the direction of in order to figure out what's going on, you got to go to this cave. And then the second act will be the journey itself, which before was completely glossed over, and now that getting to the place is going to have a few of its own perils and dangers. But again, it'll be kind of this longer first act, short middle act, and then throw them and let them get to the actual cave, do the dungeon part, and that's still going to be the big draw and the big part of what's going on. So that's the material that needs to be written. And while like I said, the dungeon crawl part's completely done, but what I haven't fully written out is that first and second act stuff I was just telling you about. However, I have gotten the beginning of it, so you can see, being the amazing artist I am, I actually drew out a very rough pencil map of what the town of Shadowhaven is going to look like, and even like put some quick little notes. Okay, there's a church here, an abandoned home here, here's the graveyard is. There are vineyards and farms nearby, and the roads in and out of this place. And the idea is that even though I'm hinting of a larger setting in this adventure, I want it to be something that can be dropped in. The whole point of having this adventure is something that is geared for first level characters. You could start a completely new campaign with this, or you could just run this as a one shot and then just be done with it. But I will also be doing linked sequels, so that if you wanted to string these together, you could tell like a bigger story that centers around this place, because the adventurers will be coming back here after the conclusion. Alex says, I'm playing a 14-year-old Githyanki monk who was forced to flee when his monastery was destroyed. I don't even know what to say to that, Alex. It definitely sounds like something a 14-year-old would do when they're playing D&D. And yeah, this is a very grounded adventure. It's fine to play with, any mix of standard, character races and classes that you've got, even though some might present some more interesting role-playing challenges based on kind of the tone and what's going on here. So since I didn't have a train of thought in the first place, let me try to recover it. It says we have 3 people watching. I don't know. We'll see. The counts are never right. So let me back up a second. Here's the cover of the early access version. You can see, right? I literally just took the map of the cave and threw a kind of a sepia tone filter over it and called it a day for that. We actually have real cover art, and in fact, I saw our cover artist Nick Kremenick, I think, is among the audience. And if Nick, please feel free to say hi. And this is the map of the cave, and the map is awesome. And one of the things that is being done, oh yeah, that is a thing I keep forgetting. Is that something I can fix here? I don't know that I can. So apologies about that. Next time I do this, I will make a note to flip the camera image before I start this kind of thing. Keep forgetting that Facebook isn't smart enough to assume that people want to see things the correct way, but you're not missing much. I mean, this is the cover, you get the idea. And then this is a map of a cave, and you get the idea there too. And not only do we have this great black and white map that's going to go in pretty much as is in there, but we also got Ben Mund, one of my longtime collaborators. We did the card game Building an Elder God. We did the Very Hungry Cthulhu Pillar book together. He is also the artist of the Serenity Guide to the Verse, which is actually over on my shelf back here. And it's a gorgeous example of what Ben can do and make things that are maps also just beautiful. So what Ben is doing is going to be taking this black and white version, which is great for the interior pages and for the game master to do his thing running the adventure. Ben is going to do a full color gorgeous treatment that we're going to have printed up as a 36 by 48 inch poster map, so that you can lay it out in full 1 inch equals 5 foot scale for standard gaming. So people will have a set piece. If we just barely fund this thing, we'll print the adventure and we will give people access to the file, so that if they want to print the poster at their local shop, they can. That will come for all the people who get a hold of the adventure. And then some people have paid the $25 pledge level, which means I will go ahead and have enough maps pre-printed that will ship with their copy of the adventure. I will go ahead and spoil one of the stretch goals that if we get over the $3,000 just to do the basics, one of the stretch goals, which the exact amount will be determined, but I will actually print the poster map and have it bundled and shrink wrapped into the adventure itself so that everyone will get the poster map, not just people who dropped $25. And then the people who did drop the $25 pledge level, they're going to get a bonus map. We're going to do a second one of another set piece location, possibly something in the forest going to when they're journeying to the cave, or it might be something that may be the town itself. So that will be commissioned. I got to figure some of this stuff out within the next week before we get too far into this. And if that looks like it's going to happen, we'll commission that and get it going. So that's part of the plans there. And now, since this is completely disorganized, you get to delve into the second place. You can, Chris, you can delve into places as long as you don't tell us about some of them. You're always welcome to delve in my cave. So my inspirations for this go back years. A long time ago, I was up in Kentucky, and we actually drove up to the Indiana border, and we went to a place called Squire Boone Caverns, and it's a cave that has like an official tour you can take and have a guide walk you through. And there's a number of things that made Squire Boone Caverns unique, and one of the big ones being there's a dead guy in the middle of the cave. Squire Boone, found out, was Daniel Boone's brother, as in the famous explorer who actually, these guys went in and charted out and mapped a whole section of Kentucky and Middle America. George, you are backer number one, so I guess that's fair. So went up there into the cave. So Squire Boone was Daniel Boone's brother. They did this, and there's a story that at one point Native Americans were not happy that these white guys were running around their territory, and Squire Boone got cut off from people, and he got chased, and his life was in serious danger. So he dove, into this cave that he just stumbled upon and hid inside. And by hiding in the cave, he was able to elude the people who wanted to kill him. And while he was in there, he kind of fell in love with the place and said it was the first time he'd felt safe in, a long time, since they were going through all this hostile territory, and the cave drew him in. And so he put it in his will that years later, that after his death, that he be interred inside the cave. And I don't know the exact story, I'd have to look it up again, but apparently he was buried somewhere else, but eventually people discovered that his wishes were to be buried in the cave, so they recovered his bones, and they moved him inside a chamber inside the cave. So if you do the cave tour in Mammoth Cave, that's a different cave entirely, Squire Boone Caverns, you're going to go in. There's a number of interesting passageways and chambers. There's a bridge that goes under, like with an underground river flowing beneath it, and you can hear a waterfall. That directly inspired a feature here. Spoiler but I assume people interested in this are going to do it, but you'll see I have the kind of waterfall, underground river creates an early obstacle once they get inside the cave because the bridge has been knocked out. So like that is right there. And so when Squire Boone Caverns had that, it was like the idea of somebody buried inside the cave, and going inside a tomb is a classic dungeon crawl trope, and going to caves is. So I was like, well, what if the cave is the tomb, just like in real life in this one case? And then I was like, well, okay, why is he buried in there? And why would that be a reason for adventurers to go in? And I didn't want it to just simply be, I didn't want it to be as boring as, oh, well, this is just a tomb, it's been sealed off, and you go in there and you fight guardians and get treasure. So I wanted there to be a more interesting backstory. So I came up with this whole idea, and I kind of took inspiration from the idea that there were natives original to this region that this guy buried in the cave was from, and that he drove them out. And because this is a fantasy setting, I decided to go with this idea of humans. Thank you, Chris. That is the link that will take you right there to get all that information. And since I didn't do any research, I could be wrong about half the stuff I just told you. So anyway, I basically backtracked from there, but I did use that inspiration about Squire Boone that that this fantasy character I named him Brennan, which all these names I kind of took a lot of inspiration from Wales, especially like medieval Wales. I pulled the folklore in there, and I used a lot of the names. So Brennan is the name of this human hero, and hero to these humans, probably a villain if you were the Shadow Elves who lived in this region originally. And this guy came in, and after he explored the place, he came back, and they drove the Shadow Elves out. And this is way back in the backstory of this setting. So the humans honor Brennan as the founder of their community and the person who opened up this part of the world where they could settle there. And they named the town Shadowhaven, and the hill that held this cave that their town founder was so in love with and wanted to be buried inside, they named it Brennan, or, which is Welsh for Brennan's Hill. And just like in Squire Boone Caverns, the actual spot, it's not like it's this elaborate tomb. It's just a cave, and in one chamber, there is this sarcophagus. And the idea would be that the townsfolk would make, as part of kind of a annual tradition, after harvest time, the townsfolk would come in and they would pay their respects to the hero, and then they would go over to the chamber next door where there's kind of a little shrine. There's a little offering. Well, they would bring an offering that could be either burned or placed in front of the tomb. They would say their little prayer, be thankful for the home that they've gotten, what this guy did for them, and then they would leave. Well, that tradition was kept up for a long time, but eventually, newer generations started being less interested in stomping out to this wet cave and sort of leaving an offering for some dead guy. And that has kind of gone away. But what they don't realize is that some of the magics that have held out the Shadow Elves for, hundreds and hundreds of years have started to thin. And now the opportunity for them to come back and cause trouble has hit. So that's the situation going on there, is that the backstory and setup for this is that after all these years, the Shadow Fae are able to come back into the prime material plane and start trouble because they want payback for getting kicked out, and eventually their end game would be to come back in force and wipe out these humans, or at least drive them off their land. And so this cave is the starting point. And so I'm not going to spoil everything, but that's kind of the backstory. They're doing something to mess with the cave. And in the early access edition, I hinted at some like mystery and story elements because one of the things people who are paying attention will notice is that the actual bad guy in the adventure is not a Shadow Elf. He is a human warlock. But he was raised by the Shadow Elves, and he is kind of working for them and on their behalf. And I actually came up with a very interesting kind of twist on what his backstory was. And it's one of those things where, depending on how the players and their characters go through the adventure, they may completely miss this element of backstory and kind of connecting the dots and finding out who this guy, the villain of this story, is. I mean, you can miss that stuff and it's still fine. Hey, there's a bad guy doing this thing, we need to go stop him. But there is an extra element, like if they do talk to the right people and connect the right clues, there'll be a slap on the forehead, holy crap moment that I'm kind of proud of as a writer. That it's a neat little twist that's not necessary to enjoy the adventure as is, but if they get there, it'll provide an element of tragedy on top of just the action of trying to solve this problem and beat the bad guys. So that's basically it for me, just running my mouth. I mean, so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of workflow. Like I said, I've got some basic notes, and I've got my map for the town of Shadowhaven, and I've got a rough idea of what I want to do for the kind of Act 2 bridging where they're doing the journey to the cave. So I'm going to be knocking that out and really getting that going over the next week. and I'll be writing up some stuff. Let me see. We have a question here. Get a print the scale map. It's a cool side piece or standalone story. Correct. So yeah, this can either be dropped in as the beginning of your own new campaign. You can do it as a one shot, or if you want, you can wait a little bit longer and see like the trilogy of linked adventures that I have in mind that will all kind of follow along from this storyline. They'll all stand alone, but they can be put together to create kind of a bigger story and take characters from that. The early access edition is just considered a first level adventure, period. The fuller version is going to basically be, you start at first level, you'll level up by the time you get to the cave, and then you'll be second level. And I'll be adjusting the encounters inside accordingly for a second level party. So that's it for that. So I gotta write the town, throw those adventure hooks in, all that stuff. Squire Boone, no. Brennan, the dead guy, he's very dead, and I don't have a ghost. I don't have a you're not actually going to talk to this guy unless somebody has magic of some kind that would allow you to do that. But that's not part of the story. What's really it's just all about is about his remains and how that ties into things. So funny enough, even though the dead guy doesn't say a word, the stuff he did all this time ago really informs what's going on and will be a big part of the first two and possibly all three parts of this adventure. But I'm not going to speak too much for part 3 until I actually write part 2 out and see where it goes. Because sometimes when I sketch stuff out, play through it, revise, sometimes you veer off in a different direction. Over planning is almost as big a problem as under planning, at least for me as a creative person. So I got my writing to do. We already got the black and white map done. Ben, we're working out the timetable of when he can complete the color poster map version of it, which I can't wait to show off. I think we're gonna have him do just an art sample of like 1 or 2 chambers to start with, so that I can just show off what it's gonna look like when he's complete, and then we'll have the full one before long. Nick Kriminik, he completed the cover already. If you go to the Kickstarter, delveinthecave.com, it'll pop you over there. You can see what the cover art looks like. It actually is a picture of the bad guy standing over the sarcophagus with purple flame shooting up out of the offering bowl. And that looks really cool. We've also, Lindsay Archer, our interior artist, has already completed, when I say sketch, I mean, she's done things that I would publish instantly, but we gave her just a couple of notes for 2 interior pieces. And I don't have it in front of me to show you, but for people who've seen the Koblenau or like some of the posts I did earlier, we have a little fairy creature that's taken straight out of Welsh folklore called a Koblenau. And she did just a line art pen and ink illustration for the early access. But her pieces that she's done for the final are done digitally, and they're done with shading and texture. So I'm actually going to have her redo the Koblenau art to match, so that the interior art all has a consistent style. She'll be doing all the pieces for that. And then we'll be just doing a touch-up on the graphic design. I got to have the map of the town. I am not going to publish this, obviously, so I'm going to have that done up so we have a nice black and white map. And yeah, everything's going on. And then once I've got the text done, I've got Emma standing by to edit the text. I've got Sean Everett ready to act on the game development side. And he's just there to double check me on rules and presentation stuff and make sure I'm not screwing anything up for the open game license, which almost happened with the early access version. I wrote a whole piece on my blog about that. So that's where the work is at. And that kind of catches up on all of me just purely running my mouth. So, if anybody has any questions about this or anything else I'm doing, please feel free. I'll talk for a few more minutes, or as long as anybody has any questions for me. Otherwise, I'll wrap this up in about 10 minutes or so. And I apologize for my voice. I didn't think it was giving out, but it seems to not be in the best shape. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So Chris, you had some comments and questions before. Anybody else have anything to say? How long between when the Kickstarter ends and when the campaign ships? I put out a expected reward date in for October of this year, and I did that as a way to pad some stuff. Honestly, we should be able to beat that by weeks, if not at least a month, because of how much stuff is already chugging along. I've already got that. I've already got an initial quote from the printer. Actually, I got about 10 quotes from printers, but I picked the one I wanted. It's actually the same company I worked with that printed the 5th edition of Metamorphosis Alpha. Company I've worked with for many years, based out of Minneapolis. Their quality is fantastic, their turnaround time is good, and their prices are great. I love them. So it looks like we'll be working with them. The only question will be whether it will. I'm going to throw some alternate specs their way to see what it will cost if I am bundling in, like if they actually print a poster map with every single copy and then shrink wrap it all together. Like, obviously that's going to be more than just doing the module all by itself. So depending on where we finally fund, but that won't actually increase any time at all, because we're doing the artwork for the poster map regardless. It'll just either be a digital file for most of you, and I'll be doing just a short run for certain Kickstarter backers, or in that. So I wouldn't be surprised if everybody had it in September, but October is the solid. We can definitely do it by then. That's very achievable. Yes. Yep. I don't know if you heard me earlier, George, but I mentioned that, and it was great. I wish I could have just kind of quietly sat over in the room and just experienced the differences just in game systems, and then your own style of game mastering, like what that would be like. But hopefully I'll do it. I would love to. I've never actually played Hackmaster, even though I owned 2 different editions of it. So yeah, I was saying October. Now, one of the nice things is anyone who backs the Kickstarter, again, plug, delveinthecave.com will take you there. Everyone who backs it at the $5 level or higher will immediately, I'll do the backer surveys right away, since this isn't going to be a long turnaround. And then everyone will immediately go ahead and get a download code where they can grab the early access edition in PDF form. So everybody, if they wanted to just get started right away, or at least check out what the initial version is, they're going to have that. That's already done and pretty decent. I mean, it's like we've had good response. And in fact, one of the nicest votes of confidence so far has been a lot of our early backers, including George, backer number 1 right there, or people who already owned the early access version. So that told me that they liked what they saw so far and wanted to help be a part of making this final product happen. And not only that, but the whole idea here is too that if we raise money, and this is going to help support the future stuff in this series, and the better this does, the more fantasy RPG content for that particular role-playing game I'll be doing, in addition to some of the other stuff going on. I did a whole blog entry yesterday. If you go to my website, jamiechambers.net, I actually wrote, it's going to be 3 parts, but basically was writing how did I get started playing role-playing games? I went back to 1982 when I was 7 years old and talked about playing D&D for the first time, and led into how I got into it even more, other people I played with, and how my dad wanted to get into it. So I wrote a little bit about that, and that's kind of my thing. What I wanted to do with this adventure was to kind of do an homage to some of the classic games that I enjoyed back in the day, but I didn't want to do a deliberately retro adventure, because I do think there are companies doing great stuff like that already. We got Goodman Games with Dungeon Call Classics. We've got Troll Lord. We've got companies that have really carved out a niche for themselves of specifically doing these OSR, what they call old school Renaissance classic style games that are really trying to mimic the style of those early versions of D&D. And I wanted something, so I didn't want to quite go there. What I wanted to do was evoke a feel of some of that. And that's why, even for the cover design, I thought my brother, Digger, plug in for him. He is amazing at putting text and pictures together and doing stuff like that. yeah, Castles and Crusades, another, you know, great homage to those like early, you know, OD&D style of play. So this, I wanted to evoke that, and when you play it, I wanted to evoke the feeling, but I didn't want to try to mimic the presentation style exactly. I wanted it to still be written in more of a modern way and to my taste. So it's kind of it's kind of a mashup of how it goes. And one thing, let's see, like things in terms of presentation, I don't do read aloud text at all. I used to be a huge fan of that, and I loved that, but at the same time, I got out of the idea of using it directly, even when it was right in front of me. And I got more interested in providing kind of more like bullet points. It's like, this is the information that the player characters will perceive. And so it's kind of presented like that. And I wish I had a better copy to show off. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I've got some text here. And I know you can't really see it, but to give you at least an idea of what I'm talking about. So like, here's a thing about a waterfall. So I just have a description. Here's what's going on. And then I have these little headers of like, this is follow-up stuff. Like what happens if they, you know, they're going to see the remains of a bridge down here. They're going to see, oh, what happens if they try to get across this gap that has a waterfall flowing right through it, and what, you know, some guidelines like that. Some of these will be things like if the characters have a, you know, perception of this or that, they see, you know, this particular clue. So it's almost like these little bullet point things to help you find it, but there is no read aloud text. There is nothing you're supposed to just simply recite verbatim, because I really feel like that can sometimes take you out of it. I mean, it's fine, and you know, I played adventures that use it, but it's just not to my style. I really like it when the dungeon master or game master is just talking to the players in a more natural way. And some people have this thing where if they're just reading out loud, it changes the tone. So that's just a thing, and that's going to be consistent across everything that I'm doing. We do have there is a creature section at the end. Most of the creatures in the adventure are straight out of the monster book for your game. But we do have specific like NPCs that are working against, and the Koblenau, the new creature type I was talking about. So that's what the little guy looks like. That art is about to be redone, but we have that completely written up for 5th edition. And then we've also got the Shadow Fae, which instead of just doing my own version, I used the Open Game license and took those from the Tome of Beasts from Kobold Press. It is correct, right? No, I don't remember. I think it was the Tome of Beasts. There's a few others. I want to say that's it. Tome of Beasts. It's Kobold Press. They already had, I mean, one thing they did, there weren't that many fey creatures in the core books for the game, and Kobold Press added a lot when they did their monster book. I really liked their stuff. And that's one of the cool parts of the Omen Game license, is that we can all share and redistribute and work with that stuff. So I incorporated them as is into the adventure, and then did an NPC that is a Shadow Elf based on their material. So it's one of the neat parts too. And I'm friends with Wolf Bauer and some of the other guys over at Kobold, so it's fun to be able to completely legally be able to just mix and match. And the nice thing too is I'm making my stuff in here open content as well. So if somebody wants to grab the Koblenau and throw them into something else, they'll be free and welcome to do so. I like that part of the community, even among publishers and people who want to do stuff like that. So there is that. Any more questions? It can be about the adventure or whatever. I'll hang around for a few more minutes before I wrap this up. And I'm not sure who's actually with us at this point. Let's see. I guess if nobody has any questions, I'll just talk for a second about some of the other stuff I'm doing. Besides that, I do have a Patreon going on, and it's been kind of on the back burner for a while because I've been trying to finish products. George, I missed much of the dialogue. Any plans for a sequel in the future? I'll get back to what I was about to talk about in a second and answer George's question. Answer is absolutely. There is a direct sequel planned. And since you are familiar with the adventure, you know that depending on how things go, it could end with a real problem. What the bad guy is trying to do is at least partially accomplished. Even if the heroes stop the truly bad things from happening, there's still a situation, because the town is still, like, whatever level the trouble has reached, the magical curse that has been inflicted and all that, it's still exactly where it is, even if the bad guy is killed or driven off. So, so I was talking about how there are the bones of this town founder. So this is a spoiler for part 2, but in order to fix what's going on, the adventurers are actually going to have to take the bones that have been tainted by this shadow magic, and they're going to have to take it back to the town. And this is a point where more nasty stuff has opened up, and just the journey back to town is going to be dangerous, and they're going to have to get the priest to sanctify these bones in order to cleanse them of this dark magic, because the founder of this town is so tied in to what's going on. They're using the remains of this guy Brennan as a conduit for this magic. So the priest has to purify the bones, and obviously the bad guys have a huge stake in stopping them. So there is going to be one point in that adventure that will be more like a tower defense game, where everybody's going to be inside this church. There's going to be a priest doing his thing, so it's almost be the opposite of the climax of this adventure, where you're trying to stop a warlock from performing a ritual. In part 2, there's going to be a point where the heroes have to defend a priest who's performing a ritual, while the bad guys are trying to invade wave after wave and trying different tactics to do it. So there's going to be this tactical endurance test in part 2, and that's going to be kind of sandwiched in the middle. And then there'll be a neat climax that takes place after that, when, depending on how that goes. So I've had a few alternate titles, but I'm trying to keep with the name scheme of A Delve in the Cave. So I'm going to try to keep the same kind of rhythm, kind of like what George R. Martin did with the Song of Ice and Fire books. You had A Game of Thrones, A Storm of Swords, A Clash of Kings. This is going to be A Delve in the Cave, A Walk to the Church, or whatever. I'm going to try to have some fun with it like that. So yes, George, and not only that, but I also have a loose idea for a part 3. So this is going to, at minimum, be a trilogy of adventures that could either all stand alone. They'll all have entry points, or if anybody wants to play them on their own, it'll be fine. But they can also be put together and become kind of a mini campaign that will probably, go up to, we'll see, level 6 to 8, depending, probably about, I'm guessing, like 2 levels per adventure, depending on how it shakes out. So, at least for 5th edition. Any other questions? Anybody else? Otherwise, I was going to talk for a second about just the other role-playing game project I've got going on. Well, actually, I have a bunch of stuff happening, but not going to dump all of it on you guys. As you know, I did the Metamorphosis Alpha 5th edition role-playing game, and I created a brand new game system for that we call System 26. Now, Metamorphosis Alpha, unfortunately, the license has, and I say unfortunately, I mean, it's not like anything I'm mad about, but the license reverted back to Jim Ward, the creator and owner of that property, and he's got other deals going on. Actually, I think simultaneously with Goodman Games and Troll Lord, which is kind of fun. And that's all in support of Metamorphosis Alpha 1st edition. I'm a fan of all that stuff, and I'm happy to see that. But the good news is I own the game system that we used for 5th edition, and I have some neat projects in mind for that. And one of them is called Humans and Households. And, in the past, I've already done one modern supernatural horror game, and I've also done one that is a supernatural comedy horror role-playing game in the past. So this is going to belong to that family of stuff. Hauntings and Households is essentially going to be Small Town Ghost Hunters, the RPG. So it's funny, actually on my desk I have my ghost die from the original West End Ghostbusters role-playing game from back in the 80s. It's sitting there as a little piece of inspiration, because I actually ran that for friends of mine off and on for a couple of years in the late 80s. And, I also was a huge fan of the tabloid role-playing game that Zeb Cook did for TSR back in the 90s. So this is going to be like this. It's going to be a combination of comedy and horror. And the whole idea is that you're going to be playing these small-town paranormal investigators. They're going to have day jobs or no lives or lots of personal problems. You're playing deeply flawed characters who aren't necessarily equipped to deal with real stuff, and it's gonna be heavily inspired by some of the reality TV programming related to that kind of thing, the classic Ghost Hunters, Destination Truth, Ghost Adventures, shows like that. If you ever saw the season 3 episode of Supernatural called Ghost Facers, that was hilarious and also provided some inspiration for this. So the idea will be you're playing, these sort of not necessarily bright or at least competent characters, but who are nonetheless highly interested in trying to figure out what's going on with this different supernatural stuff. So Hauntings in Households will be, the kind of people and equipment that they would have in the real world going in and trying to deal with these hauntings. Except we're going to, turn the dial up a little bit, from what people report, but not necessarily full on as intense as like what Ghostbusters was. So it's going to be a little more grounded, a little bit more emphasis on humor. And that's going to be in development. I'm going to be doing the development of that all on Patreon, and the people who subscribe over there are going to get access to that material as it's written. Get to see some playtest stuff. I'm going to offer up some chances to playtest, directly with me online, and eventually, take the show on the road. I really want to get that game fleshed out and written, and then it will transition over into actually producing it once I'm happy with how the game plays, if that makes sense. So once I've done wrapping up Delve in the Cave, I'm going to be diving a little bit harder into developing Humans in Households. And I've also got one other simultaneous project, also System 26, where I'm not going to be the lead guy. A friend of mine is going to be, looks like he's going to be the lead writer and designer on developing a whole nother thing, and I'll be just the guy backing him up on that, using the same game system. And this will be a family of games that all use the same basic rules mechanics, and hopefully, but will all be easy entry points, great ways to teach new people how to play, and not necessarily too serious. So I got that going on. We're going to relaunch Building an Elder God, the Cthulhu-themed card game that I've got. So got a lot going on. In terms of where I'm going to be, I've got travel lockdown. I will be in Nashville, Tennessee in early July for Hypericon. And there is an outside shot. I'll be going to Gen Con depending on how certain things go. I was actually talking to someone about that earlier today, but that's still kind of on the outside whether I'll be doing that or not. And I am a attending professional at Dragon Con this year, so I'll be around there as well. And probably going to be adding some in-store events. I'm probably running Delve at least a few stores, either locally or regionally. And for people who would like me to run this adventure for their group, if you check out the Kickstarter, that is two of the higher end rewards include me running this online using Roll20 as the platform. And then I've got 2 spots available where if people wanted to do it, I will either drive or fly out to wherever you're at, and I will bring everything with me, and you can pick whatever game group you want up to a certain size, and I will run the adventure for you, and we'll hang out and talk, and that could be a lot of fun. I love an excuse to travel and meet people and play games, so I love to do that. So it looks like we're almost to 5, so I'll go ahead and open it up. If there are any more questions, I'll take those now. Otherwise, I'll cut this off in a minute and we'll call it a day. I'm looking at this little pile of papers I've got here. I've got, you know, my outline. I've got a whole lot of stuff I actually got to go through, look at, and some deadlines I got to meet. So, all right. Well, it looks like there's no further questions. I appreciate everybody who's stopped by and listened to me ramble. I, you know, hate the sound of my own voice, and I always feel awkward doing these things, but there you go. I also really appreciate everybody who has backed the Kickstarter, or even if you don't have any cash, or this isn't a product you're interested in, but still shared the word. I do, you know, the favor side of this is I'd really like you, I mean, sharing just general links on social media is useful, but, you know, if you want to go the extra mile, I would ask for two things. One would be to tell at least one or two people you know in a more direct way that are gamers, people who might be receptive to this, because I don't want to spam people. I don't want to throw unwanted stuff in people's faces, but I do want to get the word out there. So if you tell people directly, hey, this is this guy I know, he's working on this, it's pretty cool, check it out, and then give them the link and say it's more of a direct line up to get people there. And also too, if you have you know, a game store that you frequent, if you're on good terms with the people who work there, I'd really appreciate it if you told them as well, because my friend George Vasilakos, way back in my first Kickstarter, was the one who said, look, not everybody's going to take you up on it, but you know, I'm a huge supporter of game retailers, and I think they are still this big lifeblood in our hobby. And I have two retailer levels. One is just a simple, they can order 6 copies of the adventure. We confirm they have a real brick and mortar store, and then they'll, just when everybody else gets it, they'll have 6 copies they get at those prices, so they can turn it around just like any other product. And then I've got a higher end reward that would allow them to actually be a sponsor and have an ad in the back of the adventure, which we actually did that for the early access version. We had a game store that did a sponsorship and paid to have a back page ad, which was kind of fun and was unexpected. So anyway, if you could tell a friend or two and talk to your local game store and give them the link. Again, delveinthecave, all one word, .com. And yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks everybody. Game on, and ciao.